Eric here, your online instructional coach, and I'm going to be talking about how to deal with plagiarism and academic dishonesty. So this is a screencast version of a presentation workshop that I've done via WebEx. I'll also be doing this face-to-face, so I'm not sure when you're watching this. So this is really just a canned version of something that I think might work better live, but I know everybody can't attend the WebExes or the presentation, so I'm presenting this information in this format for you. What I hope you do with this is reach out to me if you want to talk about any of this stuff. So I'm going to move as quickly as reasonably possible without talking too fast. You are obviously watching a video, you can pause, you can rewind. This is really intended to be somewhat interactive, so I'm going to pause, give you a chance to think about some things. But again, reach out to me, send me email, call me, let me know if you want to talk about any of these things. I would love to work with you one-on-one, if you're teaching online, if you're teaching a hybrid class, or even face-to-face classes to talk about these issues. I'm going to hide my little talking head here. And if you're here, maybe you do care if students cheat or plagiarize, and there is no chat area, in this YouTube video. I guess you could type into the chat, but just think about it. I mean, why do you care about the fact that students may cheat or plagiarize in your class? As you're thinking about that, let me just talk a little bit about where I'm coming from in this presentation. I've been involved with the Student Learning Committee at Front Range, involved in assessment, at least going back to 2007 in a formal capacity. And so in thinking about assessment and student learning, this issue of academic honesty comes up because if we're trying to assess student learning outcomes and students aren't actually doing the work, then of course there's a problem there. I'll also say that my work on the assessment committee, student learning committee, has just prompted me to, adopt a culture of inquiry about everything I do in terms of teaching. And so that kind of basic drive for inquiry and action research is going to be behind a lot of the things I talk about in this presentation. I also participated in the Writing Across the Curriculum program many years ago, back before 2010 or around there. And then I served as the co-director of the Writing Across the Curriculum program at the Larimer campus, and I was involved in the online Writing Across the Curriculum program. And so if we're talking about writing and making writing a really important part of your class, then thinking about plagiarism is important. And so I did presentations on plagiarism. I did research on plagiarism going back to 2010 and 2011. I did faculty surveys back then. And so in 2015, I've kind of refreshed my thinking about these issues, and that's part of the reason why I'm here today. I've also been the online instructional coach, and I know that online faculty worry about cheating and plagiarism. And so I want to address that from that perspective. Where did I do my research? I did a lot of research online. I also read this great book called Cheating Lessons by Dr. James Lang. I highly recommend that book. Donald McCabe is just a well-known researcher in issues around plagiarism and academic honesty. And if you do a web search, you will find his information. I can also send you a handout. Obviously, I don't have that here, with a full list of citations. So, most of the stuff in this presentation is my paraphrasing and summarizing of things that I found doing research over the course of several years. I do have individual citations for each slide, so if there's something that jumps out at you and you want more information on, I can tell you where I got it. If you want to check my facts or dig in, I'd love to do that. Why do we care about cheating? This is what I think you might have said. One reason we care is it undermines student learning, and it undermines institutional integrity. If students are cheating, they're probably not learning. And it undermines the idea that college is a place where students come to learn and not cheat. And if you're an online teacher, I know we may worry more about what happens if the perception among students, but even our peers and colleagues, what if the perception is that online classes are just full of cheating? right, then not only do students start to kind of expect that, but the quality of online courses may be in doubt, and maybe unfairly so. Um, I think we believe that cheating undermines the professional and civic values that we want students to have, that we think will serve students in the future, that kind of frame the kind of society that we want to live in. And so we want to fight against cheating, because we don't just want to teach content, we want to prepare students to be workers in the workforce or go into academia. And so I think that's one of the reasons. I think many of us simply think cheating is morally wrong. And even if we have never really acknowledged it that way, we think cheating is morally wrong, and so we need to do something about it. We need to discourage students from doing it. We need to punish them when they do it.
Attention.
Well, I just got an emergency notification on my phone, so I just paused. You might have heard a little bit about that. So I think I left off with cheating is morally wrong. So I think you might think about that motive for why you might care about cheating. And I think we take it personally when students cheat. We often perceive it as a personal attack, as a form of disrespect, as something that students are doing to us, right? They're lying to us, they're cheating on us, and so we take it personally when students try to deceive us or succeed in deceiving us. There may be other reasons, and if you have other reasons, I'd love to hear about them. Send them to me by email. So you can stop and think. You can write if you want to, but I don't have a chat area for you to type into. Do you think cheating is cheating and plagiarism? I'm going to talk about these things all wrapped together. Cheating, plagiarism, all forms of academic dishonesty. A little bit later in the presentation, I'll parse them out for us. But for right now, if I talk about cheating, I'm really talking about all of those things that we might umbrella under academic dishonesty. So, is it more common today compared to the past? And if you want a minute to think about it, pause, because I'm going to move on and give you the answer in a minute. What percentage of high school and college students admit to cheating when surveyed? Which of these buckets do you think it falls into? And again, if you want to think, you can pause for a minute. And if you teach online, or even if you don't, you may think about this question. Do students in online classes cheat more when we compare them to students in face-to-face classes? I'm going to answer this one first. The answer is no, at least as far as the research I could find. I did find some instances in particular studies where it looked like online students might be cheating at a slightly higher level compared to some face-to-face classes. But overall, I didn't see any significant research that shows that there's a general difference in cheating. And as you'll see when I go through the rest of this presentation today, that kind of makes sense to me. If we really look at why students cheat, it could be the case that students cheat more in some cases in online classes, but it may not be about the online class itself. More on that later. So who cheats? Well, here's a little logical argument for you. I teach logic. Most humans will cheat. All students are humans. Therefore, most students will cheat. That's one of the nutshell takeaways that I came out of my research with. I guess I'll also say, if you don't know me, I teach ethics. So I'm a philosopher. I've been teaching ethics to students for the last 20 years. And this rings pretty much true with what I know about students, right? So I'll assure you that the fact that I teach ethics, that I'm an ethicist, doesn't necessarily mean I'm a more moral person or that I care more about morality and ethics. But I do think about it a lot, and I talk to students about cheating and honesty and all these things every semester. So, I think this is pretty true, and I'll talk about why. So when we survey students, it's about 75% of students surveyed admit to cheating at least once, while in college. This is framed in different ways. Sometimes it's, have you cheated in the last year? Have you ever cheated in college? Have you cheated in high school? So it depends on exactly how the question is presented. But the number is fairly steady. About 75% of students admit to cheating relatively recently in the last year or so in high school and college. And this number has held pretty steady for the last 50 years or more. Again, some of the studies I looked at showed a slight increase, a few percentage points over the last 20 years. But again, I saw other cases where it's less prevalent. So maybe this shouldn't surprise us. Human beings probably haven't changed a lot in the last 50 years. So maybe the percentage of human beings who cheat hasn't changed that much either. So I guess even if it's gone up 4 or 5%, if it started out at 75%, lots of students cheat. And so if a few more students are cheating today compared to the 1960s, that's bad, but lots of students were cheating anyway. I found this intriguing. For one thing, cheating is more common in high school than college. It's more common for freshmen in high school than seniors in high school. It's more common in freshmen in college than seniors in college. So cheating is, common in middle school. It's common in high school, but it actually becomes less common the further along the educational track a student is in. And again, that may make sense in context a little bit later. So when we asked high school students, or when high school students were asked, somewhere between 60 and 90% talked about, yes, I cheated at least once in the last year. That range is just due to the way the question is asked. But what's interesting is, so after you ask students whether they've cheated, you can ask them how satisfied are they with the type of person they are, with their personal character or their personal ethics, and the vast majority, 90% or so, are satisfied. So most of them are cheaters and most of them are okay with it. So one case study that I looked at, this was Iowa State University College of Business. They had a case where they basically determined that almost every student was cheating on homework because there were answers to online homework online readily available, and it became clear that most students were cheating. And so the College of Business decided to do some research, and I just found it very interesting. So what they really wanted to know from these students is, why did you cheat? So most of the students ended up saying, yes, I did it, and these were the sorts of answers students gave. So I'm calling these rationales, rationalizations, explanations. They really fell into 4 categories. Students were separating themselves from the action, or they were saying it wasn't my fault, it was really someone else's fault. They really tried to redefine the action as something good. Yes, it was cheating, but it was good, so therefore it wasn't so bad. Or they wanted to redefine the outcomes. And so let me offer a few specific examples of what they said. Number 1, they're not a cheater under normal circumstances, but this was an exception to the rule. So I think this falls under, I'm a good person who did a bad thing. I'm not a cheater, I'm just a person who happened to cheat in this case, right? Distancing themselves from that action. They blame the professor on lots of counts for not being clear about what constituted cheating. Well, you never told us, we couldn't look at answers if we found them on the internet, or you should have been smart enough to know not to assign problems where we could find answers on the internet, or because you should have known that we would work together, right? Once we found the answers, that we'd collaborate and share those answers. Number 3, I think, offers some insight. Students noted the fact that, look, everyone cheats. So since everybody was doing it, it's the norm and it wasn't wrong. Or most people, if you asked them, wouldn't say that this constitutes a wrong case of cheating. This is how business operates in the real world. Guess what? If I find the answers, I'm going to take them. They believe that what they did was a means to an end. This was how I studied. I found those answers, and working with those answers actually helped me learn the material. And maybe a side note or a slight tangent, students differentiate what is often called pro-social cheating, right? Helping someone by offering help, offering guidance, even giving someone the answers. That is perceived as less wrong than receiving help. And so again, that just may be the psychology of the way we parse out these moral issues. So let's just let that hang in the background. Students are really good at rationalizing cheating. And again, as someone who's been teaching ethics for 20 years, It almost doesn't matter what ethical theory you purport to follow. Almost everyone is very good at rationalizing exceptions to the rule. So it doesn't surprise me that students are really good at it too. I might ask you to think about, when is the most recent time that you cheated? I won't ask you to, there's no chat room, so you can just think about it. Oop. If I can get my slides in order here. When's the most recent time you cheated? Why did you cheat? And if someone called you on it, how would you rationalize it? So let's see if I can get this video to play. Hang on.
I want to talk to you about cheating. And the reason I picked cheating is because it's interesting, but also it tells us something, I think, about the stock market situation we're in. So my interest in cheating started when Enron came on the scene, exploded all of a sudden, and I started thinking about what is happening here. Is it the case that there is kind of a few apples who are capable of doing these things, or are we talking a more endemic situation that many people are actually capable of behaving this way? So, like we usually do, I decided to do a simple experiment, and here's how it went. If you were in the experiment, I would pass you a sheet of paper with 20 simple math problems that everybody could solve, but I wouldn't give you enough time. When the 5 minutes were over, I would say, pass me the sheets of paper and I'll pay you $1 per question. People did this. I would pay people $4 for their task. On average, people would solve 4 problems. Other people I would tempt to cheat. I would pass the sheet of paper. When the 5 minutes are over, I would say, please shred the piece of paper, put the little pieces in your pocket or in your backpack, and tell me how many questions you got correctly. People now solve 7 questions on average. Now, it wasn't as if there was a few bad apples, a few people who cheated a lot. Instead, what we saw is a lot of people who cheat a little bit. Now, in the economic theory, cheating is a very simple cost-benefit analysis. You say, what's the probability of being caught? How much do I stand to gain from cheating? And how much punishment would I get if I get caught? And you weigh these options out, you do the simple cost-benefit analysis, and you decide whether it's worthwhile to commit the crime or not.
So that was just a very short clip from the behavioral economist Dan Ariely. It's a great TED Talk that I just showed you a little clip from. You know, if you just search for Our Buggy Moral Code in Google or go to the TED website or on YouTube, you can find it. It is well worth watching. But what Dan Ariely really talks about is, look, in the right context, almost everyone will cheat. There are a few exceptions, and there's some more things that he says in this TED Talk that are really interesting, but almost everyone will cheat in the right circumstances, and so maybe we shouldn't be surprised that pretty much most students will cheat in the right circumstances. A few students probably are these pathological cheaters, right? People who are just going to cheat at every opportunity. And some students will never cheat. There are probably a few people out there that are rigorously honest in every context, no matter what. But most students will cheat, especially under certain circumstances. And if we recognize that, we can maybe make some progress into demotivating students from cheating. So why do students cheat and what can we do about it? So let's look at what are the sorts of factors that might help us figure out why students are cheating and what we can do about it. And we can look at them in 3 different ways. We can talk about student demographics, we can talk about personal factors, and external or contextual factors. And first of all, let me talk a little bit about demographics. Let's see if I can get my window straight here. Men self-report cheating more often than women. Some of the statistics I look at, it was multiple percentage points. Younger students more likely to cheat than older students. We already mentioned that. Students who are struggling, but also the very high achievers, are more likely to cheat than those people in the middle. Some cases, here at Front Range we don't have fraternities, but I saw some evidence or some statistics that suggested students who are in fraternities or sororities might be more likely to cheat than those who aren't. Students with higher workloads more likely to cheat than students who have plenty of time. Maybe not a surprise there. Sorry about that. And let's look at some personal factors. So demographics are really what maybe things students can't control, just who they are. Personal factors, what sorts of personal factors does research show maybe make students more likely to cheat? So students who are extrinsically motivated, more likely to cheat. Students with low self-efficacy, what low self-efficacy is a low self-confidence in their ability to do the work. So students who can't do the work or who just believe they can't do the work, more likely to cheat. Students who view their teacher as incompetent or uncaring, more likely to cheat. Students who believe cheating is normal. Students who believe students like me cheat. Students who think I'm the kind of person who would cheat, or other people like me at the institution are cheaters, so I'm part of that group, I'm going to cheat too. Students who are unclear about how academic dishonesty is defined by you, the teacher, or by the institution, more likely to cheat. And of course, students who are more able to rationalize cheating as morally acceptable or pragmatically necessary, more likely to cheat. So, preventing or minimizing cheating. When it comes to demographics and personal factors, I guess my message to you is we don't want to stereotype students as cheaters before they've cheated. It may be true that when we're looking at overall populations of students that men are more likely to report cheating than women. But what do we do with that when we're talking about particular men and women? There's nothing we can do about it because, the individual diversity within these categories of people is probably a much bigger deal than these general tendencies that the categories might have. So it really doesn't help us a lot to say that when we talk about 300 million Americans, students who are excelling in classes are more likely to cheat than those who are just, mediocre students. Even if that is the case, it doesn't tell us anything about individual students in our classes. So I don't think those demographics help us at all. Well, what can we do about personal factors? It's really hard to control what students believe or what they perceive. However, identifying those personal factors may help us because it may lead us to factors that we can control. And that's really what I want to spend most of the time in this presentation talking about. What can we control as teachers or academics or student services folks? And how will that help? So we cannot prevent all cheating. We're never going to be able to do that, at least coming from me. Students have been cheating at an extremely high rate, going back at least 50 or more years, and my guess is there were cheaters as long as there have been lecture halls, and there were probably students cheating who were sitting at the feet of Plato and Socrates, right? I mean, so humans are humans. We can't prevent everything, but what can we do? I think there really are things we can do as individuals and as institutions. So we can disincentivize cheating to try to make it less likely, and we can also look at specific interventions to curb cheating on homework, exams, and essays. So I know one of the reasons you're here is for those practical kinds of things. Here we are 23 minutes in, and I'm still talking about theory. I think it's important because, yeah, we can talk about the practical things we can do, but again, people have been trying practical fixes and band-aid solutions for academic dishonesty as long as there have been students and teachers, and I don't think we've made many inroads. So yes, I'm going to talk about that, but I think these quote-unquote theoretical things we can do or philosophical approaches are probably more profound in the long run. So let's look at external factors that promote cheating. And external factors, I mean contextual factors. These are things that we might actually be able to control. So I'm going to mention them here, and then we're going to go through them one at a time, talk about what they mean, what we might be able to do with them in the classroom. So I'll just, if you want to pause, you can look at all of these, but I'm going to just go through them one by one and talk about them. It might be the case that many of these things are going on in your class or classes or at your institution, or maybe only one or a few of them are going on. I am not sure how much each one contributes to student cheating, but I guess we can think about that as we go. Get my slides to go. I already mentioned this. Rates of cheating have remained steady. Fixes are probably not going to be that profound. I'm quoting here from Dr. James Lang, who wrote the book Cheating Lessons. He says, increasingly, these findings, right, the fact that cheating has remained steady, the rates of cheating for the last 50 years, point to a radical proposition that the very nature of the college education we provide to our students, both in its design and delivery, may turn out to be the deepest cause of cheating on campus. In other words, it may be that cheating rates are so high because too many university curriculums and courses are designed for cheating. And I have really been swayed by Dr. Lang's message here. So yeah, let's talk about fixes, but I think the problem is bigger than that, or deeper than that. All right. One external factor, and I've got it in highlight here, italics, because I think this is both an external and an internal factor. Extrinsic motivation is one of the things that promotes cheating. When a student is extrinsically motivated to do something, they are more likely to cheat than if they have an intrinsic motivation. And you know, I want to offer a case study of assessment at Front Range Community College. We can talk about what things were like, you know, back in 2007 versus today in 2015. So I think I had these slides backwards. I think going back to 2007 or before 2007, many of us at Front Range were cheating when we were doing assessment. We were not doing authentic assessment. We were not intrinsically motivated to do assessment because we thought we were doing it for someone else. We thought we were doing assessment to please the legislature, who didn't know what they were talking about, or to jump through a hoop that some external accrediting agency provided for us, that they didn't really care about student learning. They just wanted to see numbers on a spreadsheet. So I think that assessment was not very successful at Front Range prior to 2007, at least in my tenure here from 1999 to 2007. Some people did assessment, but you know, I won't out myself as a cheater, but I think it was fairly common that people either made up numbers, massaged numbers, simply did not do it authentically. Today, in 2015, I think we are doing assessment in a much more authentic way because I think we have tried to instill this culture of inquiry in our faculty and staff to tell everyone why assessment matters, so we're doing it for the right reasons. We're doing it for ourselves, and as a side note, we'll have data to report out for accreditation. So, you know, this is certainly run true for me. When I'm internally motivated, intrinsically motivated to do something, then I'm much more likely to take it seriously and do an honest job with it than if I'm simply motivated externally. So what can we do in the classroom? I mean, we can't guarantee that students are coming to us with intrinsic motivation. They may be motivated because their parents told them to come to college, or because they just want that piece of paper, the degree or their certificate, or they just have to take our class because it's a requirement, right? So we may not be able to tell a student, you must be intrinsically motivated before you can take our class. But what we can do is try to teach the kind of class that engages students at that intrinsic level, right? To make something fun, interesting, to touch bases with things that matter to them in their real lives, that they're doing in their classes. How does this connect with what students actually care about? And, you know, maybe you think that's not your job, but to the extent that you can tell students why studying world mythology or ethics or philosophy really makes a difference, then do that. It may also be the case that if we can give students some choice and autonomy, for instance, in framing the assignments, and framing the sorts of papers they write, the sorts of assessments that they do, we may allow them to find intrinsic motivation in what they're doing. So lots of ways we might be able to do that, and if you want to reach out to me for coaching, we can work on it. But I also think we can just, We can infuse our classes with enthusiasm because we are intrinsically motivated by our own disciplines. And I think our enthusiasm and the fact that we can bring things to life and not make things boring and not make things seem like busy work, those are all things that we can do in an attempt to help students find intrinsic motivation. I guess we can also tell students that if you're only extrinsically motivated, you're not as likely to get as much out of the class in general. All right. Another possibly external or internal factor is how the student views the competence and whether the instructor is caring or not. So what does the research show? It's actually pretty interesting. So my case study that I want to look at here is the online master-teacher research that I've done over the last few years. That online master-teacher research really shows that when students nominate a teacher for a master teacher, almost inevitably what they point to as being extremely meaningful is the fact that that teacher was an engaged presence in the class, that teacher demonstrated enthusiasm, that teacher showed the student that they mattered, that the teacher cared about their learning, that they thought about him as a real person, that they infused the class with fun, excitement, passion. You know, students are using all of those kinds of terms. So what's interesting is when students perceive their teacher to be incompetent or uncaring, they're more likely to cheat. So maybe in some sense cheating is personal. If a student doesn't respect you, that may be one more way that they can rationalize cheating. You know, this person doesn't even know what she's talking about, so she doesn't even deserve to get an honest answer from me. I don't care about plagiarizing if I don't think this person is even a good writing teacher. Or this person doesn't even care about me, so therefore cheating is easier to rationalize. Now, I'm not saying that's a good justification for cheating, but you can probably imagine how that might happen. I think it's easier said than done. At least at Front Range, all teachers are competent, at least in their disciplines, because we only hire teachers that have the appropriate degrees. But I think it's much harder to somehow expect students to see your competence. And I don't think we should be, setting out to kind of prove to students how competent we are. But I will say that all the ways that you can show your competence as a teacher probably make sense, all right? Demonstrate your expertise. Show students that you can go beyond the textbook, that you can personalize lectures and materials, that you do know what you're talking about. Does that mean they won't perceive you as incompetent? Maybe not. But if we recognize that it matters, maybe there's something we can do about it. I think there's more that we can do to show students that we care. Because we can demonstrate that through engagement and presence and giving meaningful and timely feedback and responding to students and whatever. There's lots of ways that we can do that. So some possible suggestions. Show competence through personalized content, solid course design. The more problems and errors they are, typos and dates that are wrong, and promises that you say I'm going to open the quiz and you don't, or I'm going to get that quiz graded and back to you by Thursday, and then the students don't hear from you for several days. It's pretty clear that there are cues that students might pick up on that really have nothing to do with your credentials as a content expert that might lead an online student to think that this person doesn't know what they're talking about. In online classes, I think it's much more likely to happen than in face-to-face classes, right, where those kind of classroom dynamics and the teacher-student relationships are kind of more set in a face-to-face class. Where in an online class, I don't think students distinguish the teacher from the class nearly as easily. Bridge the empathy gap. One of the reasons that I turn on my camera every once in a while is because I know from being in WebExes, if you just think I'm a voice on the other side, it is harder to pay attention. You're more likely to gaze off to the side to start doing something else. I mean, when I talk to students in screencasts, I keep my face there all the time. And it's not because I like seeing my own face, I don't, but it's because I know that when students see me, they think I'm a real person, and that matters. Again, as an ethics teacher, I think it's pretty clear that lots of ethical dilemmas we face are rooted not necessarily in logical differences and our rationalization about ethical theory, but simply in the fact that we care more about some people than others because we see them or not. So, whatever you can do to personalize your class, to let students know you're a real person with screencasts or audio, infusing your class with style, giving meaningful personalized feedback, those are all things that I think will pay huge dividends in your class. Canned feedback is not nearly as good as making sure there's at least maybe once a week that students are actually getting something personal, right? That a student knows when they read that feedback that it's not something you copied and pasted to every student, that there's at least a line in there that lets them know that you actually read that assignment. I don't think every single bit of feedback needs to be like that. In fact, I give most of my feedback generally to the whole class, but I do try to reach out to every student at least once a week to make that personal connection. Prioritize the focus on instructor-directed teaching. If you're a Front Range person, you've probably heard me talk a lot about that. Where does the student experience your presence in the class, and where do you experience yourself as a teacher in the class? That is probably the time when you can capture the teachable moment, when you can give meaningful feedback, where you can be a presence in that learning experience for the student, where they will actually start to experience you as a real person who cares about them. And make sure students know where you're going to be in the class. So often you're trying to be an engaged instructor, but the student, maybe you're in discussions, but the student's not in there because they're not sure that that's really where you're doing your quote-unquote teaching. So help students out. Let them know where you're going to be in the class. Help them find you in the class. High-stakes assessments. That is a factor that promotes cheating. And the case study that might just kind of hang in the background is this case just from last year in Atlanta about teachers and administrators in public schools caught cheating. They went to court, they were convicted. I think some of them are serving time in jail, maybe not all of them. What were they doing? They were getting together and cheating on standardized tests. They were helping students cheat. They were altering the answers students gave after the fact. And we might wonder, why would teachers and principals do this? Well, one of the reasons might be is that these tests are extremely high stakes, right? Teacher performance evaluations may rest significantly in some cases on the percentage of students who score at certain levels on standardized tests. The fate of an entire school may rest on a percentage of students that get certain scores on certain standardized tests. So these are high stakes assessments, and when we have a high stakes assessment, students are more likely to cheat on it. If teachers are willing to cheat in high stakes situations, it's probably not a surprise that students are likely to cheat. What's the solution or a possible solution? Well, we can simply go from a few high-stakes assessments to many lower-stakes assessments. We can do the same sorts of assessments, but if we give students lower-stakes opportunities, they're less likely to cheat. Now, I don't know what we do in terms of the case study of standardized tests in public schools, but I do know, for instance, here in Colorado, there's been pushback to the number of high-stakes tests, the value and importance put on a few or single testing experiences, both as a reflection of student learning and also an assessment of the quality of a teacher or a school. We may not be able to control what legislatures want to do in terms of standardized tests, but we can make changes to our own classes, right? We can go from a midterm and a final to 10 or 12 quizzes, and I'm going to talk more about that. We can also offer more assessments, a bigger variety of assessments. So instead of just giving 2 exams, we can give quizzes, essays, projects, diagrams, case studies, etc. That has been shown to, it won't prevent cheating, but it will, students will be less motivated or are likely to be less motivated to cheat when we go from a few high-stakes assessments to many or a bigger number and variety of low-stakes assessments. Another factor that promotes cheating is assessments that are performance focused. So what does that mean? Students have studied the entire semester and they get an assessment and that says, what can you do today? And that's a reflection of what you've learned. So let me offer this case study, and this also came from last year. There was a significant case of cheating in the U.S. Air Force, and this was cheating done by Air Force officers who work in nuclear missile silos. And they were cheating because they had a performance-based assessment, an exam of some kind, and they all felt like they needed to get 100% on that exam. So this was not only high stakes, because many of these officers felt like, if I don't get 100% on this exam continually, I have zero chance of getting promoted, right, from lieutenant to captain or captain to major or whatever. And I'm imagining that these officers probably said, the answers I give on this quiz may not be reflecting what I actually know how to do as the commander in a missile silo. So we might think about the difference between performance-focused assessments and mastery-based assessments. So what's the difference here? Mastery-based assessments are more long-term, right? They're more based on, over the course of a semester, what has a student been able to demonstrate that they can do? Maybe a case where they get multiple attempts to practice, and eventually there could be some sort of a capstone or a performance element at the end, but that performance element would not be the only measurement of what a student's learned. It may not even be the main measurement of what a student has learned. So what's a mastery-based class? It's based on giving students multiple opportunities over the course of a semester to master learning outcomes. And we are assessing the culmination of everything a student has learned, not how they can perform on a particular exam. So I don't know what we can do about nuclear missile silos. What we might do is say, how officers do on one multiple choice exam may not be reflective of what they can do on their job. Maybe we want to look more at, I don't know, how are they actually doing their job over the course of weeks or months? What do they do when they have a supervisor watching them, or when they're in, I don't know, presented with case studies or put in scenarios, or who knows what it would look like. But I imagine some people are going to say, this is just not an accurate way to show what I've done. This test does not really reflect what I've learned. So in the classroom, what can we do? Well, we can go to mini quizzes versus a few exams. And again, I'm going to talk about that more later. We can go to quizzing to mastery. This is something I've implemented in my own classes in the last few years, and it has had a tremendous difference. Instead of giving students one chance to take a quiz and then finding out that most of my students didn't do that well on the quiz, they now get unlimited attempts to do the quiz. It's the same quiz, the same due date, they just get multiple attempts. And so what my students do now is they work toward mastery. The quiz is the same, but eventually they get to 100% on the quiz. Now my sense is students may have been motivated to cheat when they only got one chance to prove that by doing the reading they understood the content. But my focus is now different. My goal is the same, right? I want them to master the content. I want them to earn 100% on the quiz. But I think the way I've reframed my quizzes from a performance-based assessment to a mastery-based assessment changes the dynamic of the class. There's no reason to cheat on the quiz because you get as many chances as you want, and it becomes a form of self-assessment where students are self-motivated to earn that 100%. So there are lots of other ways we can think about mastery versus performance. We might let students do rewrites. We might let students do exam corrections. Again, what's the real point of the class? Is it that students learn the material, or is that students get the answers right on an exam? you may not have time to grade the rewrite, and that may be a legitimate reason to not accept rewrites. But if a student can take a paper that was a C paper and rewrite it and demonstrate that they've actually learned and mastered those elements of writing, and now they actually can write an A paper, I can imagine someone saying, if the grade should actually demonstrates or reflects what I've learned, paper rewrites make sense. Exam corrections might make sense. Maybe a way to think about this is, how can we frame our classes to try to measure what a student knows or what she can do at the end of the semester, but not focusing on a few high-stakes, performance-focused assessments? And this is a win-win teaching and learning presentation, so I am certainly not suggesting that this needs to put more work on your plate. I think there are innovative things that we might come up with to let us not work that much harder, but really help students succeed at a higher rate. And if we can convince students not to cheat, they might actually master content. All right, more factors. When there is ambiguity from you, the teacher, or from the institution on what cheating is more likely. Or if you as the teacher or the institution doesn't take academic honesty seriously, or if we fail to communicate how serious it is to students, this can lead to cheating. My case study here is performance-enhancing drugs in sports. So you pick your sport and you pick your timeline. Pick football, pick baseball, pick track and field. I think often a sports governing body might say the right things. We don't want our athletes to be cheating using drugs. But if everyone knows that there's ambiguity about how it's tested, or if it's kind of a wink-wink, nod-nod thing, then maybe it's not a surprise that many athletes cheat because, I don't know, it's ambiguous, or the message really doesn't come through clearly. So, what's the answer? I think some sports organizations have cleared up ambiguities. They're trying to send a stronger message, and maybe that's working. Maybe not. But what can we do about it as teachers or as academics or people who help students succeed in student services? Well, we can come up with clarity for ourselves and our institutions about what cheating is, so we can actually inform students appropriately, and we can take it seriously, right? I mean, we can take it seriously, and we can communicate it effectively and in an ongoing way to students. And please, when I say take it seriously, I'm not necessarily saying that the sanctions are super high. I'm just saying that it's something we care about. We're not an institution that cheats. Cheating is wrong, and here's why. Front Range is not the kind of place that's for cheaters, that sort of thing. So what can you do? You can be clear about what you count as cheating. On assignments, exams, and papers, are students allowed to collaborate or not? Can they look on the web? Can they use their notes? Can they use their books? Be clear about what cheating is and what cheating isn't. Tell students that you care. Tell students that you care about cheating. Tell them that you take it personally. Tell them that you care because it undermines their learning. Tell them that you care because it's unfair to other students. Tell them that you will be looking for cheating, not because you don't trust them, but for these other reasons. And that you take it seriously, and if you find it, that you're going to do something about it. And talk about it frequently. Don't just, certainly have it on your syllabus, have clarity there, but talk about it frequently. Bring it up as part of the conversation of the class. Reiterate your policies frequently when it comes to homework, before exams, before papers, during the paper writing process. Talk about it, talk about the sanctions, just bring it up as part of the normal conversation. Your institution might want to do this too, during orientations and catalogs, in all of those places. A few more. Students are more likely to cheat when they can rationalize that it's pragmatically necessary or that it's morally acceptable, and when students have low self-efficacy, right? When they're unsure about their ability to do the work, they're more likely to cheat. There's an interesting case study from Cheating Lessons by Dr. Lang. And in this study, these researchers asked young children, I don't know, 6 or 7 years old, to do this really difficult physical task. Stand, and behind you there's a target. So you're supposed to throw a ball with your offhand, so if you're right-handed, throw with your left hand over your shoulder and try to hit the bullseye with this little ball. So this was a really, really hard task. It was practically impossible. And unsurprisingly, when the researcher left the room, almost every student cheated, right? They would turn around and throw the ball. And so, you know, what do we want to do here? We would like to help a student understand that cheating is not necessary, because maybe the bar is not set so high that it's impossible. I am not talking about lowering rigor, but I am talking about really thinking about how high of a bar are we setting for students? How do we inform students about what those expectations are? And how do we let them know that that assessment is fair? And how can we give them high self-efficacy? Well, if it's an impossible task, like was the example in this case study, children they're going to have accurate self-efficacy, right? They're going to know they can't do it because it's an impossible task and they're going to cheat. But if they can do it, you want to help students have an accurate picture of their competence, and we could call that metacognition, right? How do we help students do a self-assessment so they can actually gauge whether they can do the work or not? Now, if they can't do the work and they know it, then maybe they'll cheat. But at least they have an accurate picture. I think it can really help students, though, because if they are better at self-efficacy and they're more accurate at knowing what they can do, they're less likely to cheat, or they're more likely then to implement study strategies to help them know. So what can we do? Set realistic standards that students can understand. Allow students to practice. If you allow them to practice with practice exams, with drafts, with looking at samples, with, you know, you name it, homework that's reflective, quizzing to mastery, let them practice. That helps them with self-efficacy, with metacognition, and it definitely helps them figure out that they don't need to cheat because they can do the work. Offer formative assessments. Figure out what a student can do while they're in the learning process. So formative assessments are these ways that students or teachers can look at a student while they're learning and intervene in that learning process, capture that teachable moment, and that allows us to give meaningful feedback when it matters, to gauge, to know that the student is off base, right, and intervene before they decide they have to cheat on the paper or the quiz. You might also decide to let students know cheating is lying. I found this really interesting anecdote from a teacher who said this. The 8th grade student sitting across from me looked as though I had slapped him. His face darkened. He had been caught copying someone else's homework. Up until this point, he had reacted with a kind of so what attitude. Previous lecture had fallen on deaf ears. It's no big deal. Everyone does it. You know, we've already talked about this. So this teacher said, calling someone a liar may seem harsh, but that's just the point. She says, what? Students need to acknowledge that cheating is a problem. If they're going to acknowledge that, they have to feel that it is something wrong. So, you know, I don't know that you want to do this, but I personally like this, both as a psychological tactic or reason, but also as an ethicist. This sounds a lot like the kind of thinking that my students end up articulating when we study the moral theory called deontology, presented by Immanuel Kant a few hundred years ago. And Immanuel Kant is someone who says cheating is always wrong. And, you know, this is not an ethics lesson, but let me paraphrase Kant this way. Cheating is always wrong First, because all cheaters are people who disrespect their classmates and their teachers, because all cheaters are manipulating people. You're manipulating your teacher, you're manipulating your classmates by cheating off of them. All cheaters are selfish manipulators who only want to get what they want at the expense of other people. All cheaters are liars. All cheaters are selfish. And certainly all cheaters are people who think that they're special because they're doing something that they know full well cannot be a universal rule. Because after all, if everyone cheated, there would be no one to cheat from. If everyone plagiarized, well, it's logically impossible, but you know, the plagiarizer really has to hope that everyone else is a really great authentic writer, because then there's lots to plagiarize from. And the person who wants to copy notes or find, you know, look over at someone's paper, they rely on everyone else being honest, or most other people. You know, the perfect world for a cheater is a world where everyone else follows the rules. So cheaters are those selfish people that set themselves apart and prey on other people. This is basically calling cheaters liars. I don't know, teaching ethics, I get to do this in the context of my class and let students talk about this stuff. But I don't know, food for thought. Maybe you want to frame cheating this way in your class and let students know what you think cheating really means. I've already mentioned Dan Ariely, a little bit about honor pledges. So we already know that you know, Dan Ariely does all these really cool experiments designed to entice students to cheat. And I got a little picture of one of Dan Ariely's books up there. So in one of these experiments, he had enticed students to cheat. And in the case where most students then were cheating to some degree, he added a variable. Before they did the exam where they were likely to cheat, he asked them to recall the 10 Commandments. Just think about them. Or he asked people to try to write them down. And then in the control group, he didn't mention the 10 Commandments at all. So what was interesting is, in almost every case, when students were asked to recall or try to write down the 10 Commandments, that immunized them from cheating. And this was the case even for atheists, and even for everyone, including Christians, who had a lot of trouble remembering the 10 Commandments. Most students, he said, could not come up with more than 3 of the 10, but it was irrelevant, right? Just evoking the idea of morality, of moral rules, somehow did something to these students so that they stopped cheating. So maybe all you need to do is remind students that there's a moral context to cheating. And one of the ways people do this is with honor pledges. I've seen instructors do this at the individual level, and I know that there are institutions that implement honor pledges at the discipline department, or, you know, very widely. And here's what an honor pledge is. You ask students or require them to write an honor pledge on their assignments before they submit them. Something like this. I, Eric Salaha, pledge that I have neither given nor received unpermitted aid on this assignment or essay or during this exam, or whatever it is. I've read some research that shows that this is fairly effective at lowering the incidence of cheating. And it makes sense in the context of what Dan Ariely found, and I think just within this context of it's harder to rationalize away something as cheating once you have actually stated that what you have done is not cheating. So this may be worth a try. And if nothing else, if a student does cheat, you will have their written pledge that they didn't cheat, and so you've kind of really made it easy to follow up on cheating after the fact. Another factor that promotes cheating is few or no formative assessments. And we've mentioned this a few times, right? Because things like quizzing to mastery or paper rewrites or drafts, or all these things are formative assessments. Briefly, the difference between formative and summative assessments. Summative assessments are those, I don't know, performance-based assessments. What can a student do at the end of the semester? Right? Whereas a formative assessment is more like, what can a student do in the moment, right? Formative assessments are assessments of learning while the learning is happening, learning along the way. And the intent of a formative assessment is to allow for self-assessment and to provide opportunities for meaningful, timely, instructional intervention, right? The teachable moment. Oop, went backwards. Let's see here. So what can we do? Well, if we're not doing any formative assessments, we can do some. If we're only doing a few formative assessments, we can do more. And we can provide students with more opportunities for self-assessment. So when we do assessment of learning and progress, we are offering students these opportunities for self-assessment that relate to metacognition and self-efficacy. And we're also giving ourselves a chance to intervene. If the student can't do the work, then we can intervene so maybe they can do the work by the time they get to the assessment. So what can we do? We can add classroom assessment techniques, CATs. And if you've never heard of CATs, email me or do a Google search for classroom assessment techniques. You can offer quizzes to mastery, which I've already mentioned. You can offer self-assessment opportunities of all kinds. And you can just in general focus more on the process of mastery as well as the product, right, performance. Because I'm not saying we don't care that students can perform on exams. I mean, that does matter. But I have found that many of us focus exclusively or mainly on that and not nearly as much on mastery. Students are more likely to cheat when cheating is an accepted norm, or when it's a common practice, when it's known to be a common practice, and when the institutional process for dealing with cheating is ineffective, when there's a lack of faculty buy-in, when there is not a coordinated effort to intervene, and when we don't catch students the first time, when we can actually educate them. And I'm not going to talk more about it, but I think this case of performance-enhancing drugs in sports fits in here. Just the last month, a meta-analysis of drug tests in professional level track and field events has said that, I don't know, a third or more of the winners in these events probably cheated using performance-enhancing drugs. Certainly we could look at cycling in the past where, I don't know, I think a lot of people think nearly everyone at the top level of cycling for many years was cheating, or many. Look, if everyone cheats, then cheating is normal and it's not wrong. Again, I'm not a relativist when it comes to ethics, but I can certainly see how students would perceive things that way. And when there's no process for catching cheaters, when there's no buy-in, when we're not actually caring that much, there's not a coordinated effort, when people aren't getting caught, well, they're likely to cheat, or more likely to cheat. So what do we want? Well, we want to make sure cheating is not an accepted norm, or is not thought of as an accepted norm, and we want to have an effective institutional process. We want to have buy-in, a coordinated buy-in where everyone is on board and participating, and we want to try to intervene to catch students the first time they cheat. That way they don't become repeat offenders, and when someone does cheat the second time, then we can think about it as something much more serious. So what can we do? We can just tell students, it's not normal to cheat. That's not something I think is normal. Front Range is not a place of cheaters. So, you know, we can at least say that. We don't want it to be normal. We can definitely follow our institution's procedures and report all cases of academic dishonesty. So find out what the institution's procedures are, find out who to talk to, find out what you're supposed to do, and do it. Encourage your colleagues to do the same. It doesn't matter if one person does it, everyone has to be doing it. You know, and especially remember new faculty who might not know or who might be reticent to admit that they have students who are cheating because they think it's a reflection on them. Adjunct instructors, part-time faculty, teaching assistants. Look, most full-time faculty who have nothing to lose by reporting cheating don't report cheating. So the percentage of new faculty, part-time faculty, and other people is even lower. There are probably students who are cheating in almost every class and plagiarizing every paper, and they just never get caught. And, you know, well, if we're never catching them, we're simply allowing them and, I don't know, facilitating their cheating. So I encourage you to turn in cheaters. And that is the case even if you say, I've dealt with the cheating in my class. I don't want a sanction from the Dean of Student Services, but I want this on record in case someone else catches the student cheating in the future. And that is totally acceptable. But you've done your part to make sure that if this becomes a repeat offense, that next teacher will have someone who's thought about her beforehand. Honor codes, I'm not going to talk much about it other than to say there are schools that have honor codes which specify in detail people's responsibilities around cheating, that you should never cheat, that it's your responsibility to turn in a cheater. Often honor code schools have extremely harsh sanctions against cheating, and there is some evidence that schools with honor codes have lower levels of cheating. But I have also seen evidence that new schools that adopt honor codes, they don't reap those benefits. And so I think what I'll speculate on is honor codes have more to do with an institutional buy-in to thinking about academic dishonesty and talking about it in an ongoing way, right? Onboarding students and faculty and everyone around this culture of honesty. I think we can do that without an honor code. So if you want to explore honor codes, go for it. But I think that's a long-term thing that an honor code might only really kick in if people take it seriously in a generation or so. Well, students are more likely to cheat when it's easy and when getting caught is unlikely. Well, there's a lot of students cheating, and at least at Front Range, very few students get caught cheating. I mean, all you have to do is talk to your Dean of Student Services, and if you figure we've got something like, I don't know, 20,000 students every year, ask them how many cases of plagiarism and cheating have come across their desks, and I can almost guarantee you it's going to be a handful. 5, 10, a dozen. So I think it's pretty obvious that there are students who are cheating that aren't getting caught. Lots and lots of them. So what can we do? We've talked about ways to minimize, the motivations to cheating, but how can we make sure to catch students when they cheat, or to just make cheating really, really difficult? So what can we do? How can we design our classes? How can we design our assignments to make it impossible? That would be great. We don't have to worry about catching cheaters if cheating is impossible, but how do we catch it when it happens? So, when it comes to homework, it's really hard. Because it's really hard to check homework for copying because students tend to be doing homework when they're not in class. I don't know what we can do. It's just really hard. If you're in an online class or using some kind of analytics, there might be settings within the software that help check for cheating. If there is, we can let students know it's there and we're using it. For instance, in D2L, you can check IP addresses of who's doing the work. And if 2 students are using the same IP address, that might tell you they're roommates or that they're logging on from the same computer. If 2 students are logged into an online quiz or exam, and they started at the same time and finish it at the same time, or one person does the quiz from 8 o'clock to 8:50, and then the next person does the quiz from 8:50 to 9:10, and they have identical answers, those are things that might give us circumstantial evidence that students are cheating. And there are other things that we might be able to do. So figure out what your software can do. And if you're going to use those analytics, I think it makes sense to tell students what you can see about them. Consider the goal for homework. If it's just formative assessment, then maybe it's either less important to talk about cheating, or maybe you want to say, look, homework is really for self-assessment. So if you want to work together, or you want to use homework as practice and test yourself, that might just tell students, look, there's no reason to cheat on something that is intended for self-assessment. And I'll just be honest, I've looked at a lot of classes, I've even looked at my own classes, and sometimes I'm not sure why I'm giving homework. If students perceive it as busy work, then it becomes an external motivator. I think it's pretty important to let students know why they're doing the homework. Is it as practice for the exam, well, then there's some intrinsic reason to do it. Or is it self-assessment? Or is it a formative assessment to give you, the teacher, the opportunity to intervene before they run into problems? Let them know why they're doing it. Make homework meaningful. Make it practice. I already talked about that. Maybe you should reduce the weight. If homework is high stakes, they're more likely to cheat. So maybe you can make homework a lower stakes assessment. Be clear about whether homework is collaborative or individual in nature. Let students know what you count as cheating when it comes to homework. Maybe you want to ask for an honor pledge. If you have other particular things you do with homework to minimize cheating, I would love to hear them. Please email them to me. What about exams? Number one, I already talked about, don't rely on a few high-stakes exams. If you offer a midterm and a final or 2 midterms and a final, your students are much more likely to cheat than if you do 12 cumulative, comprehensive quizzes. I'll mention more about that at the end of this presentation. Use open book exams. That's one way to make cheating impossible. If you let students use the book in their notes, then they can't cheat by using their book and notes. And if you craft your questions carefully, you can probably craft an exam that is just as an effective assessment as a closed book exam, depending on what kinds of questions you write. Lower the pressure by making sure students understand what the exam will cover and what it will be like. Offer practice. Help students with their self-efficacy. I'm not sure that there should be surprises on an exam. If it is a performance-based exam, students probably need to know what they're going to be tested on so that they can adequately prepare for that one high-stakes performance-based exam, right? Offer practice. Give them example exams. Let them know that the problems they're going to see on the homework reflect the sorts of problems they're going to see on the final, right? That sort of thing. Tell students you're employing strategies to make cheating more difficult. Tell them, for instance, that in a face-to-face class, students are going to have different exams. Or in an online class, there's a question bank, and so every exam is going to be unique. Or you're likely to see questions that are rearranged in a different way, so don't bother asking your fellow classmates for help, right? Those sorts of things. Or if you're going to be checking IP addresses, that kind of thing. Use a question bank. I already talked about that. Use questions that focus on things covered in your instructor-generated content or that were covered in discussions and not just from the textbook. Students can't cheat by using the textbook if they're expected to know the kinds of things that you talked about in your online lectures. We are all doing our own work, providing our own content, helping students learn. So maybe we want to make sure that there is material on the exams that reflect those things that we did. Or if students are supposed to take discussions seriously, maybe we want to mine those discussions for exam problems. Or frame the exam question around a scenario that we talked about in class. So some person who hasn't been in the class won't be able to cheat. There are learning management system options such as disabling printing, disabling opening of new windows, and other things that are built in to minimize cheating. Investigate those and consider them. Number 8, I talked about. Make sure exams cover the things that you said the exam would cover. Make sure there's enough time to finish. Make sure that success is possible for students. Ask for an honor pledge. I pledge that I didn't cheat. I pledge I didn't give anybody help on this exam. You can certainly consider proctoring exams. If you're an online teacher, you could ask for an exam to be proctored in a face-to-face situation or using a technology-driven proctoring situation. I'm not promoting proctoring because I personally happen to think that proctoring is not the best way to disincentivize cheating. I think there are lots of other ways, and we've talked about many of them here. But proctoring, if you're worried about it, then if students are being proctored, it's one way. It won't. I don't think we can guarantee students won't cheat while proctoring, but it is a hedge against cheating. What about essays? We've talked a lot about cheating. We're going to talk a little bit about plagiarism specifically in the next 10 minutes or so when I wrap up this presentation. So what do you think about this definition of plagiarism? Is it sufficient? And would you agree or disagree that there is a meaningful difference between intentional and unintentional plagiarism? So, much of the stuff I'm going to talk about when it comes to plagiarism is driven from kind of the philosophical perspective provided by the Council of Writing Program Administrators. So if you did a Google search for WPA or Writing Program Administrators, you get a lot of cool stuff on plagiarism, because writing teachers think a lot about plagiarism because they teach citation, they teach writing. This is what they do. But I think writing teachers also think about this because they know that other faculty value writing and employ essays and essay exams and papers and research papers and lab reports as a very common assessment. And so the reason the writing program administrators think about plagiarism so much is they want to make sure that everyone is thinking about academic dishonesty and plagiarism, and that we all think about how we can be part of the solution to this problem. So the WPA definitely makes a distinction between intentional and unintentional plagiarism. They classify this as follows. Misuse of sources versus plagiarism. So all of those citation problems that students have, where they don't have the right APA or MLA or Chicago format, or they have the, I don't know, a period instead of a comma, or they forget to do the parenthetical in the proper way, or they don't italicize or put quotes in the right place, or they forget to put quotes and they paraphrase, or they paraphrase and they forget an author tag. You know, the WPA is going to say in most cases that's not plagiarism. That is misuse of sources. It is important. It may be a reason to give a student a bad grade on a paper, but this is really an issue of careless or inadequate citing the ideas and words that are borrowed from another source. This is an opportunity to help students learn how to do better on the next paper. Versus plagiarism, which is submitting someone else's text as one's own, or intending to manipulate and blur the line between one's own ideas and those that are borrowed from a source. So, is this a clean line? No. Because sometimes it's hard to tell if a student is simply paraphrasing too closely and they knew they were paraphrasing and they just didn't, you know, put enough author tags in, versus the student who is hoping that you'll think that that rough paraphrasing of an author is their own words. But, you know, I think at some point there's a line, at least the WPA says these are two different things, and that we might want to deal with them in different ways. And if you want my opinion, I agree. So how do we address the misuse of sources? Number one, realize that students might not know how to cite. They may have not actually completed the requisite composition classes yet. I don't know. I mean, at Front Range, we're trying to do better at this, right? We're trying to make sure that students who are coming in as developmental writers are taking CCR and progressing into their college level writing classes as fast as possible. But I think most writing teachers, composition teachers at Front Range, and my sense is across, you know, lots of places would say this. Most students aren't really called college writers until they have completed their kind of core writing sequence, and that's often 2 classes, English 121 and English 122. A student can take a lot of classes before they've finished those college writing classes. So you may simply be expecting students to do something that they don't know how to do, or that they've only been introduced to. So, I mean, what do we do about that? You may have to teach them how to do citations in your psychology class, or in your history class, or in your economics class, because they may not know. Or you may need to partner with the Writing Center to help students learn those skills. I mean, that's just the way it is. So if you're someone who thinks it's totally on the writing teachers to teach writing, then I think you're just going to have to put up with students who often won't live up to your expectations. I'm certainly going to say this is a shared responsibility, and especially when we're teaching, 100 and 200 level students who often are taking classes that aren't their major, who they, classes they may not know much about. It's on us to help make sure that they know what they're supposed to do. Know that helping students become good and ethical writers is a shared responsibility, as I mentioned. And if you care about good writing, you should help students and not just expect other people to do it. Be specific. If you want a particular citation style, talk about it and make sure students know. So if you just say do citations, students may not know. And I know some people don't care if it's any of the formal styles. They just want quote-unquote citations. I don't know what that means, and your students probably don't know what it means. Help students by pointing to resources. Writing centers, online writing resources, style guides, you name it. Consider the misuse of sources as a teachable moment and deal with it accordingly. Is this a case where you can dock points, but tell students, if you want to go back through and fix your citations, right, I'm helping you learn a skill, then I'll give you back some of the points. Or if you can demonstrate proper citations on the next essay, then I'll go back and actually give you some of the points back on your first essay. Or even if all you do is make sure you're giving feedback so that the student knows that it was a teachable moment and maybe they lost points on the section of the rubric that talks about citations, they can do better next time. Require students to collect a list of sources or require them to do an annotated bibliography and review it before or as part of the final project. If you make sure that students take the writing process seriously, and if you collect artifacts of the writing process, students are going to be less likely to plagiarize, because if they have to collect sources and do an annotated bibliography, cheating just becomes harder and harder. If I have to do all this work anyway, why bother cheating? Use peer reviews. Use peer reviews as part of the process, and make sure that citations are one of the focuses of peer reviews, because peer reviews both allow students to help their classmates do self-assessment, but it's a cause for reflection on one's own writing. Note that there are cultural differences in how sources are used and cited. There is also, depending on where students come from and the cultural context they come from, simply the expectations about authenticity and original work may be different. And I'll just point out that the cultural context that we live in may be changing. I mean, we live in a world where mixing and matching and sampling and copying and pasting and merging is simply easier to do online. So I don't know if you like the fact that what counts as authentic and original may be changing. Maybe you want to hold the line. Maybe you are accepting of the future. Nonetheless, we may want to keep this in mind. Our students may be coming to us with different cultural perceptions about what counts as authenticity and about the ethical need to cite sources. Consider the use of a quote-unquote plagiarism detection software like Turnitin. I'll just let you know that from my perspective, Turnitin is not a plagiarism detector, and I don't even think they call themselves that anymore. It's really originality detection. What these softwares do is they simply find matching text from a student paper to some other source. Almost every good paper is going to have matching text, because every paper that has a quote is going to have matching text. And if you're expecting your students to do citations and to do research, it's probably likely that they will have paraphrased or quoted, and even if they paraphrase, if they don't paraphrase carefully enough, they may have a word or two or three that matches up with the original text. So, is that plagiarism? To some extent, that's for you to decide and make sure your students understand. But I think one of the best uses for plagiarism detection software is for students to recognize that the goal is not 100% originality, but that they are properly acknowledging where those ideas and where those words came from. And using Turnitin as part of the writing process can really help students know look, 20% of my paper is unoriginal, and that's exactly what I want because I was supposed to have several meaningful quotes, right? But there are places where I thought I paraphrased carefully enough, but the software is telling me that it's too close to the original, right? So I get a chance to go back and make those changes. Anyway, that's my little spiel on turnitin.com. Interesting anecdote from the Citation project. So again, if you want all the sources for these, but if you just look up the Citation project, you'll find it. I think we can really help students do better by helping them with their citations, and that means helping them learn to summarize. So I found this really interesting, right? They've studied all these papers, many thousands of citations that came from these papers, and what they found is only 6% of the citations were in the form of summary. 94% were either direct quotes or passages that should have been quotes, what weren't, or paraphrases or quilt writing, stitching quotes together. Summary is more than paraphrasing, right? Summary is really distilling those ideas into the student's own words, where it really becomes the student's own ideas at that point. Now, they still want to cite that those ideas came from somewhere, but they've really shown competency and currency with the material because they've completely summarized them in their own words. The Citation project suggests this. Low incidence of summarizing suggests that students aren't really engaging with the ideas, so they're not really getting as much out of the research project as we probably hope that they do. We probably don't think that the citations are an end in themselves. We probably think that citations are important because it helps students become, it helps them actually learn the material, it helps them become part of that academic discipline, or it's a demonstration of mastery of the material, or whatever. So maybe we want to help students summarize, and if they actually understand what they're reading, they'll make fewer mistakes when they're citing things. What about actual out-and-out plagiarism? What do we do with that? This is the actual stealing of other people's words, buying papers online, getting someone else to write your paper, wholesale copying of paragraphs, intentional paraphrasing and changing out a few words to pull the wool over someone's eyes. Number one, talk about what it is, talk about how you'll check for it, make it clear that you're going to catch plagiarizers, you're going to look for it, they're going to be sanctioned and caught. And if you are going to classify citation issues as something different, then make sure students know, look, citations matter, but you'll lose points for that, and we can talk about how you get better. But plagiarizing is something different, right? Plagiarizing is an outright attempt to cheat on me, and that I'm going to take seriously. Number two, this is my best advice to you. Assign papers on topics that can't be plagiarized. You can tie papers to current events. You can talk about specific things. You can ask students to write about things that you talked about in class that they're not going to be able to find in a paper mill. You can focus on unique perspectives or audiences. Write the paper as a letter to the editor. Again, there are many particular ways to do this, but this is what I do when I co-teach a class, and I co-teach a class with Carrie Mitchell, a composition instructor. I think of our 4-5 essays, only one could really be plagiarized, and that one would be hard to plagiarize, but the rest of them, they're so unique to our class that there is just no way to plagiarize them. And so it is probably likely that you can attend to your learning outcomes in your class without assigning the stock paper, right? So get creative. I think this will also help your students be intrinsically motivated about the stuff, because it's not going to just be boring paper. It's going to be something that is a part of the class. You're going to allow them or expect them to associate it with something in their real lives, with something else they're doing in another class, those sorts of things. If you can give some choice to students on what to write about, the focus they have, that might help spark that kind of intrinsic motivation that they would have to lead them to not want to plagiarize. Focus on the writing process instead of just the final product. I've mentioned this before, but if you require a prospectus, an outline, an annotated bibliography, if you require one or more drafts, if you have a peer review process for those drafts, if you collect and or review these things before the paper's due, if you collect them as part of a portfolio, these are all ways to minimize or just make plagiarism more trouble than it's worth. And it'll also help you with that self-efficacy and help students with that self-efficacy. Writing is more than that final paper, right? If all your students think that you care about is the performance on that final paper and it's worth 50% of their grade, they're going to be more likely to cheat. Where if you think about the paper writing process as a process that will take many weeks and has many parts and culminates in the paper, then you're really doing something more about mastery, aiming toward that one summative element. But what if a student has done all those component parts? That final paper is really just putting all those parts together. Consider honor pledges for essays and learn more about plagiarism and how to address it from your perspective. I have a lot of resources I can share with you. There are online resources, there are things that you can let your students look at, tutorials and whatnot. So, if you catch someone cheating, this might be on an exam, on homework, a plagiarized essay. What do we do about it? Don't take it personally. You will. I've already talked about that. We can't help but try to realize that even though you do take it personally, it is very unlikely that the reason the student cheated was because they were out to get you. You were in the way, right? I mean, you were there, but it's not about you. So the more you can think about it objectively, the more you'll be able to deal with it objectively and not turn it into a bigger problem than it already is. If it's been a while, take time to review the policies and procedures of the institution. What do you do? Who should you call? Who should you inform? What are you allowed to do? Those kinds of things. Ask people for advice. Talk to your lead instructor, talk to your department chair, reach out to an instructional coach. Everyone has dealt with cheaters. And if you've taught for many semesters or many years, you've seen a lot of cheating. You've certainly heard people talk about cheating. So realize that it happens to everyone. Ask for advice. And ask for advice immediately. Address it right away. Even if you only have a suspicion, address it right away. Talk informally at first. Reach out to a student in as informal a way as you think the case allows and start the conversation there. Keep copies of everything. If it's an exam, homework, an essay, if it's posted to discussions, don't delete anything. So keep copies just in case. Follow through with formal procedures even if you handle the case informally. So you suspect a student cheats, you reach out with an email and you ask a question about, I don't know, where did you get this idea? Or you never really talked about this in your draft, it popped up, I'm curious, and a conversation leads you to talk about cheating. The student admits that they didn't paraphrase carefully enough or that they might have borrowed an idea. Whatever, you agree to just handle the sanction within the class, right? You don't want to put it on the student's permanent record. You felt like I reached out, I dealt with it effectively, and I'm going to move on. Still turn in the student of concern form or whatever you need to do, right? If you're not a front range person, what should you do at your institution to make sure that this teachable moment that you did was captured? So next time a student gets caught cheating and, because this may not have been the student's first time, right? Let's make sure that we have intervened and we start a paper trail. You're not destroying the student's future. There is no such thing as every single thing has to go on the student's permanent record. So keep that in mind. Carefully consider sanctions. What is allowed and what best serves student success? And this is from me to you. Maybe you're allowed to expel a student. Probably not at front range. Maybe you're allowed to fail a student. Even if you're allowed to, maybe you don't want to. So I guess I want to think about, or I would like you to think about, what is in the best interests of the student? And why do you have the sanction you have? Can you split out those reasons that you care? Are you sanctioning the student because of the educational issue, or as a part of the sanction because you think cheating's morally wrong? And maybe if you think about that, it'll help you come up with a sanction that you think is appropriate. And again, I think this is the sort of thing that you might get insight talking to colleagues and mentors about. So, what do we really want to do? We want to try to create a context where cheating is very unlikely, and I think that context might actually help the student develop the personal traits that will minimize their motives to cheat. So, up front I said I'm not sure what we can do about personal factors, but personal factors don't develop in a vacuum. So I do think the things we can do in our classes, in our institutions, can help a student develop those personal traits. We're not going to change their demographics. If they're a high-performing student or a struggling student or male or female or a freshman or whatever, but we might actually have an influence on the type of student who develops. I'm going to end with a spotlight on many quizzes versus few exams. And so this case study comes from one of our colleagues, Ariely. And I'm going to do my best to paraphrase some research that she did last year. And if I mess up, it's because I am improperly paraphrasing, and I will apologize ahead of time. But I think I've captured in a nutshell the research that Ariely did last year in her economics class. So there were several reasons why she wanted to move away from a course design that had 2 midterms and a final, which she wasn't satisfied with. Students weren't coming to class as often as she wanted to. Students weren't performing as well on those assessments as she had hoped. The dynamic in the class wasn't what she wanted. And so for various reasons, she moved from 2 midterms and a final to 12 chapter quizzes and a final. So I think this is win-win teaching and learning because she adopted some policies to try to make a change in her students, and it helped the students and it helped her. Now, she didn't do this because of cheating, but I wanted to talk about this just because I think it highlights there's more than one reason to adopt these sorts of interventions that minimize cheating. They're simply good teaching practices. So in her previous course, right, where students had 2 midterms and a final, we could probably classify this as high-stakes assessments, as summative assessments, as performance-based assessments as opposed to mastery-based assessments. Students weren't getting a lot of practice. They weren't getting a lot of self-assessment. They probably had low self-efficacy because they really weren't sure that they could do well on those midterms and final, and a variety of other things. So what did Ariely do? She went to 12 chapter quizzes and a final. And so here's what some of her conclusions. Students learned more. I could stop there. I mean, after all, that's probably what we want. They had higher final exam scores, compared to when students had 2 midterms. The students who did 12 quizzes in the final ended up doing better on the final than the students who only had 2 midterms. And they had a higher overall pass rate in the class, right? They stayed in the class longer, and they actually did better in the class. They had fewer absences. They were more likely to come to class, and this is one of the main things that Ariely wanted to do. She knew that if students weren't coming to class, they probably weren't going to do as well on those assessments. Well, more assessments gave students more reasons to come to class, and the way she talked about the exams or the quizzes gave students more incentive to come to class. They came to class more often. They had less anxiety. In surveys, they said they had less anxiety. They were happier during and at the end of the semester, as evidenced by evaluations and surveys. And Ariely's experience being in the class. She was able to intervene and facilitate learning more effectively. In essence, every quiz became a formative assessment, and so Ariely could intervene before the next quiz. And Ariely herself was more satisfied with the class. Now, I don't know how many students were cheating, if any, in the previous version, but my sense is there was less motivation for students to cheat in this class. And even though Ariely didn't adopt these practices for that reason, my sense is these were good things to adopt because they helped promote student learning overall. So I think that's the case with almost everything we've talked about today. After all, if students cheat, they're not learning. So everything we can do to keep students from cheating may motivate them to learn, and they also just may help students learn in general. So wow, I'm at hour and 40 minutes. If you're still with me, thank you very much for listening. And if you have more ideas, reach out to me and let me know. Thanks a lot.